Thank you, Anthony. It just always amazes me how many crimes there are every single day that are just so weird is not the word. Terrible, weird, just, you know, very sometimes Anthony gets a funny one, but not too often. But anyhow, let's get to things that are not funny. And I'm not talking about my guest because he's great. Today we're going to be joined by, you know him well, because he's also a Law and Crime host, Vincent Hill. Hello, Vincent.
Linda, how are you?
I'm so excited to have you in the studio because I usually have Skype guests, so I can't. I almost can't see straight.
Trust me, I know the feeling. Trust me.
You know the
yes.
feeling. Vincent was also a law enforcement officer in a past life, so who best to break down investigations and cop cover-up cases and plea deals other than Vincent Hill from Atlanta, Georgia, and also here in New York City, probably more often than that.
That's
but
right.
Anyhow, we're going to cover next Chris Watts. Now, he is the man who killed his wife and 2 young girls, and I'm interested in the young girls, Celeste, right, and Bella.
Yep.
They were toddlers, basically. They were, you know, they weren't infants, but you investigate police officers. Now, he did this. He confessed to it. We're going to listen to the interrogation. What goes in the mind of somebody like him?
Yeah, I can't even fathom what went into his mind. Of course, his original story was that when he came home, Shanann was upstairs. She had already killed the little girls, and then he freaked out and killed her. But if that was the case, why didn't you call for help? Why didn't you try to render aid to your little girls? All of the things he said points to the fact that he did it, you know, and now we know he had this affair, and there was talks of another affair where he's having a sexual relationship with someone on Tinder or something like that. So the investigators, even from the beginning, when you watched his body language, Linda, and when he's giving the press conference and he's folding his arms, and he just doesn't have any emotion that you would think of a man whose 2 little girls and wife are missing. I think investigators knew from the start who they were looking for. Well,
you know, we're going to watch when he has a little bit of emotion. A little bit of emotion. It's called lying emotion. And the police have been releasing all week more parts of the investigation, which I kind of like as a defense attorney. I like it after they plead, not before they plead. But we're going to watch right now a little clip of his interrogation. Let's see what we all think about him. Did you hear him? I didn't do anything to my wife and kids. She had things on her schedule she wanted to do. There was a lot of emotion in that, Vincent. He really went a long way to make up this story.
Well, you know, it's interesting, Linda. If you watched his news conference when they first went missing, he's very bold and stern. But when you listen to his voice there in that police interrogation, it's almost like he's crying, like he's whimpering. And that's very telling, because if someone did not have anything to do with it, they would be more forceful, just like he was in his news conference. But in there, it was more like he was trying to convince them, well, I really didn't have anything to do with it, guys. Yeah. Why do you think I had something to do with it?
And you know, Vincent, when we were at break, you told me you haven't seen some of these new videos, especially the one we're going to talk about and show, which is apparently his neighbors, now watch this, had videotaped, had cameras, and saw him leaving and coming back the day he killed his family. Now, look at this. He's watching it for the first time. Now, there's 2 cameras here. One the neighbor has, and one the police officer who has a body cam is filming him. Look at this posture with the hands on the head and the.
You know what that is?
Now, what is that?
That's the old snap posture right there. Like, old snap, I'm busted. They know exactly what happened. That's exactly what that is.
Yeah, and I'm like, oh snap! You know, when you see that, you're really, really guilty. I think I should just do the whole show like this, right? And this is what he was doing. Let me think of what I'm going to say.
Your arm may get tired.
Let me see what I'm going to say next. And then there's a theory about what happened here. Now, he finally confessed, said, you know, as you said, he killed his wife because she had killed the kids, but he had apparently planned this out. And we're going to listen to Michael Rourke. He's the Weld County District Attorney, about his theory about what went down when Chris Watts snapped. Well, that was the prosecution telling us the story, which is probably exactly how it happened. At least that's my opinion, and I'm sure it's Vincent's opinion. But Vincent does not know that even someone like Chris Watts, I think I called him Watt before because somehow his name is not going into my head. It won't stay there. Thank you, God. Okay? He's getting love letters. Now, shall I throw up now, Vincent, or shall you throw up? He's getting love letters in prison. This man who killed the one who loved him, the 2 who loved him, and the 3 who loved him. Can you explain to me any psychology of why this man, is that what makes him a good killer, or what he thinks is a good liar? Because he's not either.
You know what, Linda, I can't explain it, and there were killed his ex-wife and her friend, who women still flock to this day. And I don't have to say any names. So I can't understand the psychology of why women and men find that attractive to say, wow, this is someone I really want to spark a relationship with. But I see it all the time.
You do see it all the time. What about this whole self-help, divorce, self-help, let me destroy my family so I can have another family and maybe destroy them, that I think started, I remember seeing it in Susan Smith. Remember her?
Right.
About 20 years ago, she wanted a new relationship, so she drove a car into water, drowned her kids, and then said some African-American guy did it, even aggravating the crime she already did. So what about this guy? He wants to kill everybody. He does engage in this self-help divorce. What brings a guy to this point?
I think that was his MO from the start. I mean, there was this other mistress that he met on Tinder or whatever dating app who said he wanted to live out the sexual fantasy where he choked her while they were having sex. So I think in his mind, this is something he had already either done before that we don't know about, or was planning to do, and he was just seeing exactly how he would feel once he did it to his wife and little girls.
Well, you know, his little girl, one little girl, and I forget which one it was, had bitten her tongue, and she had defensive injuries on her. She struggled. How do you do that to your child?
How do you do that to your child? And here's what's important. You heard the prosecutor say Shanann had no defensive wounds. So if his story was true, that he walked in and he saw his wife, she had just strangled his two little girls, I guarantee when he snapped, he would have punched her, he would have slapped her, he would have slammed her, he would have done something instead of going straight for the kill.
Okay, so we have to go to break. We're going to talk more about this explosive case. You can see we all have feelings on it. Stay tuned. Come back with us. Well, Vincent, let me just do this. I am so upset. I was in love with my wife. What is that posture and that whole garbage attitude, and I'm going to call it that, of him, tell you about Chris Watts?
One word: coward.
Coward.
I mean, here's a guy, and I always tell my son who's 17, if you do something, man up to it. Don't call me to get you out of anything. If you do it, man up. That's what my dad taught me. But here's a guy who was cowardly enough to kill his wife instead of divorcing like most people do. And then, oh, I need my dad here because I'm such a little guy. And you see his dad petting him on his back.
And he's playing his family, isn't he?
He's playing his family. And when I watched that, it reminded me of when I interrogated a juvenile and I had to have their parents in the room because they're a juvenile. But here's a grown man who was bold enough, in his mind, to kill his wife and two daughters, an unborn son. But yet, I need my dad in the interrogation room before I tell you anything.
Yeah, let me hold my head because I'm so upset about it. And indeed, his mother believed him and wrote a letter to the judge before sentencing, right?
Yeah, I mean, I get that. I mean, I see parents who believe, oh, my child could never do that.
Right. Well, you want to. You want to believe.
But it goes back to what I said about my son and even my daughter who's 23. If you do something, own it. Don't try to degrade it. Don't call me to get you out of it. If you do it, own it. And that's what Chris Watts should have done, but he didn't do that there.
Yeah.
He needed his parents.
Yeah, and as a matter of fact, you know, women are at risk for the one they love most. You know, marriage is the biggest risk factor in murder, and I'm sure Vincent, being a former law enforcement officer, would agree to that. And here, the kids who were to be protected by their hero, the dad, Chris Watts, they also ended up in an oil tank. It is truly a horrible thing. We're going to, what, a clip right now of the district attorney, who I love in this case because we, Vincent and I, need a little bit of a rest. Well, you just saw just a picture of Shanann's dad just crying. Quite frankly, I don't know how he held it together, and it's because of the love of that family. The dad and that mother and are religious and don't think they can take a life. That Chris Watts benefited and is just going to jail for his whole life rather than face possibly the death penalty. But did you hear, Vincent Hill, about how he shoved the body of the child down? And can I borrow your cell phone again for just
Absolutely.
For an 8-inch, like an 8-inch round? That's about it. You know, took a whole child and shoved them through that.
And you heard that there was blonde hair at the top of that oil well where he shoved both of his daughters in. And here's the tragedy in this. The word Bella in Latin means beautiful. She was a very beautiful little girl. And he shoves her into an oil well like a piece of trash.
And celeste means heavenly.
Right.
And hopefully they're in heaven, if you believe in heaven as these parents do, because that's the only saving grace you could have to think about why my grandchildren. And the collateral victims here are both grandparents, right?
Absolutely. I mean, Chris's parents, Shanann's parents, they will never have their grandchildren now. And then, of course, her parents will never have their daughter back. Right. And then here's Chris, who's getting love letters in prison.
Yeah,
can you believe
but
it?
you know that somebody who's killed a woman and 2 young kids is going to be at the bottom of the system in prison. They're going to be gunning for him, the prisoners who sell dope.
And that's why they're moving him.
And that's exactly why, in case you don't know, he's been moved into a different prison. Well, we have to go to break now. When we come back, we're going to discuss another case at the top of my heart, the Jeffrey Epstein billionaire sex case. Stay tuned. Wow, that's one fired-up attorney who is also a victim. Now, Vincent Hill, let me talk about this, because I think a lot of people don't know the history of this case. There's apparently 60 to 80 women who were obviously used sexually by Jeffrey Epstein, a billionaire. The Palm Beach Police Department really had a great investigation going. Mm-hmm. They tried to talk to the Palm Beach local prosecutor. He kind of like took it to the grand jury to take it out of their hands, but he really didn't. It's got sent up to the U.S. attorney, who was Mr. Acosta, Alexander Acosta. Alexander Acosta negotiated some deal with the defense attorneys for this billionaire that he could go back to state court where he'd plead guilty to 1 count or 2 counts of soliciting prostitution, serve this deal, this sweetheart deal, and then immunity would be granted for him on any federal charges, any other charges for him, and everybody around him, even not family members. Have you ever seen anything like this?
You know, Linda, I have not, but here's the thing. Money is king. That's all I'll say, right? He's got billions. I got thousands. But last week on this show, last Tuesday, when I sat in that chair, right, I shared my story of sexual abuse when I was 7 years old. Wow. In Texas. So the fact that you have all of these young women that came out with their story, to me it's a slap in the face to every victim in Florida and every sexual assault victim across this country.
And it's even more than that, because the victims weren't notified. They were supposed to plea. He was supposed to plea in Palm Beach County. They moved it to Miami County so no one would know about it. Right. Okay, and that's really a problematic here. Additionally, Mr. Acosta is now Secretary of Labor. Now, I don't know whether or not you give a good deal to a billionaire who girls have labored, right, for massages for $200. What gives him credibility, but it was further discussed because a lot of people are now looking at this. They're looking at this deal and saying, how could this man, oh, by the way, Vincent, if you didn't know, when he was in county jail for 13 months, he was allowed to leave 5 days a week, 12 hours a day to go to his office. And the sheriff's department called him a client, not somebody who was a sexual assaulter, sexual abuser, with 2 private planes, an island in the Virgin Islands.
Well, again, it goes back to what I said. He's got billions. I got thousands. I guarantee I would have been in jail every day of those 13 months. And that's why people are going to look at another issue about people looking at him, right? Absolutely.
Stay tuned. Let's see. Let's go to this. Well, you know, that is what I would call kind of a circuitous argument. But one other area that annoys me here, Vincent Hill, who was a great cop and a great lawyer and a great host here on Law and Crime, is that the butler, who they called the houseman, his name was Alfredo Rodriguez, he stole the black book, which had 100 names, including 100 female names with phone numbers under the headings of massage in every city where Epstein had houses. He then tried to sell that book for $50 grand to an FBI agent. He, Mr. Rodriguez, a little guy, Alfredo, got 18 months in federal prison, then later on died a few years later. Whereas Jeffrey Epstein got 13 months and basically his only weekends because he was at his office during the week. Yeah. What say you?
Well, I'm just going to go out on a limb here and say, when I hear the word butler, I don't think they're making billions of dollars and have private planes and have that kind of influence to city officials and things of that nature when you're painted as this upstanding member of the community. People don't think of a butler as that. So I think that had a lot to do with it. It is sad that he got more time for trying to sell this book that people do all the time. They sell stuff to TMZ. They sell it to the media. He didn't do anything people haven't done that people do every day in this country.
And he didn't prey on young women. He didn't prey on 12-year-olds, 13, 14, 15, 16-year-olds. He didn't give them money for massages. He didn't bring them into a sex life. He didn't do any of that. So do you understand now why people hate the justice system?
Oh, yeah, I can understand it. And again, as a victim myself, this is a slap in the face to every victim involved in this Epstein case. It's a total slap in the face that he walks. He essentially walked on this.
I'd love to talk to all these victims here at Law and Crime, but we have to go to break first. See you on the other side. You know, when you have abused victims, it's not political. So let's listen more about the questioning by Tim McCain, Senator McCain, of Mr. Acosta, who was the U.S. attorney at the time this deal was struck.
My understanding is that there is a pending civil lawsuit filed by a couple of the victims in that case seeking to argue that they should have been given notice prior to the plea deal being entered into. Is that your understanding as well?
My understanding is that there is a pending civil lawsuit. The Department of Justice has defended the actions of the office in that matter under both President Bush and President Obama's administrations.
Well, they've been defending it for a long time, and they're going to continue to defend it because some of the victims, with Mr. Edwards as their attorney, filed suit saying that they should have been consulted under the Victims' Rights Act, a federal act, before this plea was entered. Now, we know this wasn't done, and we know there are emails as a result of the Miami Herald investigation and indications that the case was moved from Palm Beach to Miami, so the victims wouldn't know. Vincent Hill, you've dealt with victims, you've been a victim, I've dealt with victims. Victims always get notified.
Right. I don't understand this, Linda. I mean, I liken it to a domestic violence victim. When that abuser gets released or there's something going on with that case, the victim is notified under the Victims' Rights Act. So I don't understand why this didn't happen here. I mean, domestic assault, sexual assault, it still has the word assault in it, so the victim should be notified of every step in that case. I don't understand why that wasn't done.
What it sounds to me like is they took the two women who were overaged, they decided not to notify them, and then the police department, who was really livid about this, with the two detectives, one of which is now deceased, working on this, they didn't take the names of all the possible victims that had been building up as their investigation, and therefore they could say, well, we didn't have to notify the victims because there weren't any.
There weren't any victims.
There weren't, right? I mean, that's a technical way around what I would call dog doo-doo, a dog doo-doo excuse. I mean, there's no other way to explain it.
I would use a different word, but we're on the air.
But we're on the air, so we can't use a different word, and thank God we have attorneys like Mr. Edwards who actually have gone after Mr. Epstein and have not backed down, filing these suits for these victims who it's not salacious to want to hear from them. We want to hear how bad it was so that we can see whether some lawmaker can do something about this, because it's horrified us all. It had been hidden from us all until the Miami Herald really brought it to light this past week with their unbelievable reporting, just amazing, amazing reporting. So we're also going to listen to what other lawmakers want, other lawmakers who are now aware of this, including a Florida representative, Lois's name has just escaped me. Isn't that terrible? Lois Frankel. How could that name escape me? I had a mentor lawyer named Frankel who was fabulous. Lois Frankel. It's just that everybody is after this case right now. What did she have to say about the present Secretary of Labor, who was the U.S. attorney when this deal was struck? Now, you may ask yourself, why are we griping here? Because we've all been so upset about seeing this case. When somebody got a deal to dime out somebody else, apparently Mr. Epstein gave some information about Bear Stearns. The Bear Stearns people were indicted, and of course they were not guilty. You would be too if Mr. Epstein was your source. But this is not, I want to make a, this is not the Mueller investigation, the Flynn investigation, where you're trying to get national security issues and people that may have betrayed the United States government. This is underage girls, and what information could he he give about anything that would allow him to escape prosecution for maybe molesting, well, not molesting in a physical way, but molesting in causing them great harm and grief by using them for sexual purposes for 60 and 80 young women? What information could he possibly give Vincent?
I mean, Linda, the only thing I could think of is if he had something on somebody else that may be even bigger than him. That's the only thing I can think of, because you said something, it's not a national security issue, but this is a national issue. It happens all across this country. Little girls and little boys every day, every few seconds, are assaulted by someone in power, someone maybe not power from a money standpoint,
right,
but power of authority or something like that. So this is a national issue, and the fact that you can see him there on your screen, the fact that he got away with what he's accused of, mind-blowing.
And he owns an island. He's now registered to be full-time a resident of the U.S. Virgin Islands. In an island he now has 2 private planes. He once had a private plane dubbed the Lolita Express because apparently he was taking young women on it.
And you know he can hide his money in the U.S. Virgin Islands. Well,
he's obviously got a lot of money in this situation, but it's made everybody upset dealing with this, because you and I represent people who commit crimes, but it may be garden variety crimes, who go to jail for a long time. And in state prison, not in your local county jail, right? Yep. So we're going to now go to another clip. Yesterday, Alan Dershowitz appeared exclusively on this show with Brian Ross. He was representing Mr. Epstein. He was also implicated in this matter. Let's see what he had to say about both issues. Now, Vincent, I know Alan Dershowitz. We used to have houses on Martha's Vineyard. I've been over to his house. He doesn't. When I first read these, it didn't impress me that he'd be of that type, to be honest with you. And apparently, those allegations have been repudiated. All his documents show that he was not in the location where this woman said he was. But what does matter is the threat to possibly, go after a victim if she truly believes he was the one, as opposed to if she's mistaken. And that's something. Do you see that at all in cases you've dealt with?
Yeah, absolutely. Here's the thing about Mr. Dershowitz, too. Even though he was cleared, just imagine the stigma that's going to be behind this.
Right.
Especially when you look at it, and I hate to play politics here, but when you look at the fact that he's been supportive of President Trump, and there's a whole demographic that is against that. So just that stigma, just the allegation alone, whether he was cleared or not, there's going to always be a group of people to say, maybe we don't believe you, maybe you did have something to do with this.
And that's a problem. But on the other side, he's representing Epstein. He said he got the best deal, what he could get, what you should do for your client. But the problem with the best deal is sometimes when you have multiple attorneys, and you know this, well, it's kind of like a wink-wink, we're not going to go looking for the other 60 people. And yes, your duty is to your client, but there's something that sounds grotesque here, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely, and that's why I was never an attorney, because I don't think my conscience would let me, make these backroom deals. And no offense, to you, of course, but my conscience wouldn't let me make these backroom deals. I was the guy investigating the crime and finding out what happened, and then bringing that to trial.
All right. Well, we have to go to break now, and when we come back, we're going to go to the cop cover-up trial in Chicago. A lot going on here. Stay tuned. Well, you just saw an extended clip, and it's good to see that, of Jason Van Dyke explaining the shooting from his perspective. And, of course, the jury didn't believe him. The jury convicted him of second-degree murder. But there's a couple things that weren't in that clip. He told his psychologist for this trial that, indeed, that he had told his partner on the way to where Laquan was that they're going to have to kill this kid or shoot this kid. No other officers even emptied their gun, didn't even shoot one time with their gun. And indeed, that he said that Laquan McDonald actually was an assailant, assaulter, kind of lunged at him, and that he had his gun out because he expected that. Yet, the police officers who followed them, whose name was Joseph McGilligan, actually walked with Laquan McDonald, or behind him, and had holstered his gun for like a quarter of a mile until they met up with Van Dyke and Laquan was shot. So, as I was sitting here watching the clip with Vincent Hill, who was a former police officer, you said that this term that he was showing was called low ready.
Yeah, low ready.
Now, you also said something about there's no way he could have seen Laquan's eyes. Why?
Well, there were too many blue lights going on for him, because he kept describing his eyes as bugged out. And if you watch the video, Laquan's kind of walking off to the right. He has a hoodie on. So for him to say, I saw his eyes, they were bugged out, would have to suggest that Laquan was indeed advancing towards him and looking him face to face. But the video clearly does not show that. So I find it hard to believe that he saw Laquan McDonald's bugged out eyes, as he described in his testimony.
Well, the problem these cops have is there's a video that we can all see and make our judgments on, and it's a pretty clear video. As I always say, when you put your client on the stand, it's called #PrisonExpress, and that may have been what happened here with or without the video at this point, given his performance. So we have to go to a quick break. Stay tuned with us. We're going to continue to talk about this case, which has garnered national attention all over, everywhere, and even some international attention. Vincent, put you on the spot. If those discussion of those emails talk about using the words lunge and battery, and that Laquan McDonald was the aggressor and Laquan McDonald needed to be shot, and that Van Dyke should be applauded, are they relevant to whether or not there's a conspiracy in this whole department to cover up?
I would say they are relevant, because here's the thing. When you're at the scene, I mean, the story is the story. The facts are the facts. So if you have to email and suggest certain things, especially on a government-issued computer, because that's what it is, a city government, then I would question why they had to use certain terms like lunge and attack and all of these things. You know, that's what they have use of force reports for, so you can write that in your report. There should be no need to actually email this amongst each other if you wrote it in your report.
And so we're going to see now what the prosecution argues to counter what the defense objection is, that the emails aren't relevant. And oh, by the way, even if they are relevant, they're hearsay, so they don't come in. So let's see how the prosecution has been pretty savvy. Let's see what they say. So Vincent Hill, when I had a police shooting case, when I was representing the person, the family who was shot, the FOP, the union, was at the scene along with the policeman's attorneys before even the investigators were at the scene, and yet we, as the representatives of the victim, were not able to be until the police cleared the scene like a day later, 36 hours later. Here, there's emails of somebody outside, and there's also statements apparently from the union in some of the emails that are quoted. How does that prove conspiracy between Gaffney, March, and Walsh to cover up what Van Dyke did on the Laquan McDonald shooting?
It's questionable whether it does or it doesn't, right? I would still question the fact of these emails. Again, that's what reports are for. Anytime I worked a case, there was nothing I really emailed. I would email to say, hey, I need to meet with you, but I wouldn't email any aspect of that case. I would keep it in the official police report. That gets turned into the records department. That becomes public record. So why they're sending these emails out is totally beyond me, and why they would even do this, because that's typically not protocol. Everything you talk about in that case is...
Some of them are on a Chicago computer. Some of them are some of the officers, not these three, emailing themselves from their personal account to the Chicago computer. You've never heard of that?
Never heard of it. And quite frankly, I just think it's just dumb. I mean, there's no other way to say that. It's right. Just dumb. Why would you do that? Because, of course, if you're emailing from a personal device to a government device, that now becomes public record. Maybe they didn't realize that, but that's public record.
And that may be why you get an exemption from the hearsay rule, and then you have to have a little bit of relevance in the emails to make the hearsay rule even go away even further, and that seems to be what happened here. We are going to go to break. We're going to talk more about the emails on the other side. Okay, Vincent Hill, a former police officer, I'm going to put you on the spot. Here, you absolutely, because you handled so well, you have the experience, which is what we want every viewer on Law and Crime to have, to listen to somebody with experience like you. Suicide by cop, what is that?
Well, essentially, that's when a subject initiates the police shooting them. Typically, you'd see someone, shoot me, or they would lunge at a police officer or pull a gun on the police officer where they know the police officer is going to respond with deadly force. But when you look at Laquan McDonald, there was no signs, and you can see it there on your screen.
Again, right.
There's no signs of anything that would suggest suicide by cop. Now, it would be different if when you see Van Dyke and his partner get out of the car that Laquan suddenly jumped towards them with the knife in an aggressive manner, then absolutely, maybe we can argue suicide by cop. But what I saw there in that clip, No way.
You know, I've had a lot of clients that have been shot by police officers. I've also represented a lot of police officers. But usually there has to be some kind of threat that's argued. Usually they have a gun, or they have a car, the car that's always backing up and all. But it seems to me it used to be that you had to have a gun or a car. But now, even if you're 15 feet away with a small knife, or you have something that could be perceived as a threat.
See, here's the thing with knives. A lot of people that aren't trained in police tactics don't understand. 20 feet and in, someone with a edged weapon can actually do damage to a police officer, even if his gun is unholstered, because people assume you get shot, you go down. That's not always the case. And also, if the person already has to jump on you, they can do the damage. So yes, absolutely, a knife is a cutting instrument or a deadly weapon, but I just did not see the immediate threat there.
And we have the video here, which is pretty clear about the fact for all of us that 17-year-old Laquan McDonald, even though he had PCP in his system and had a 3-inch knife blade, was not a threat. And no other police officer on the scene believed he was a threat, because no one else but Jason Van Dyke shot him. So does that lead to a cover-up? Obviously, that's something the judge is going to have to decide. We're going to listen more to somebody named, somebody from the Chicago Police Department, Mr. Perfetti. His first name is Joseph Perfetti. He's going to tell us more about, I'm sorry, we're going to Jose Torres now. I apologize. Jose Torres is most interesting to both of us. He witnessed the shooting, and he called the police several days later and came in and talked to them. Let's hear what he has to say. Now, Mr. Torres and his son both testified at the Jason Van Dyke trial and are testifying here. And Mr. Torres actually went to the police station, was shown the video on a computer, which apparently was the only way you could show it. So that, to me, gave him a lot of credibility. But he later is going to come under attack, Vincent Hill. He's going to come under attack and cross-examination, along with some other officer named Fontaine, who the defense went after. If someone sees something like Mr. Torres, you see the shooting, does this case, if you're attacked, put other people off for reporting what they see if they see misconduct?
I don't think so, but I can understand why the defense attacked him, right? Because what they're going to say is what I would say. You're not trained in police tactics. You're a civilian. You don't know where the threat is. You don't know if this guy within 10 to 15 feet could have stabbed those officers and caused damage, or if he would have gotten away, could have killed someone else. So, of course, I can understand why he would come under attack, because, again, he's a civilian. He knows what he saw. But as a defense attorney, that would be my argument. You don't know police tactics at all.
Police tactics. But if he saw what he saw, and it turns out he says that Laquan McDonald didn't lunge, and this is before the video came out. The video didn't come out for a year and a half.
Right.
And it turns out that's what this whole case is about, that Laquan McDonald didn't lunge. Doesn't he have credibility?
Exactly.
All right. Well, that was a great answer, because Vincent Hill, being a host here, also knows that we have to go to break. And there are going to be more on the other side. So stay tuned, stay with us, stay watching this trial. Well, Vincent Hill, it seems to me that this is a really important email. This is March's supervisor sending an email to him. And to put in perspective, there was an Inspector General's report after this that found that Officer March, Detective March, was, and I'll read it so I don't get it wrong, the critical touchstone of the alleged cover-up, or the cover-up, as they put it in the report. Now, here, what the supervisor said is, this is your last paragraph of your report that you're going to put in on your investigation,
right.
Okay? Why was there something, or was there something missing when you heard it?
Well, what I did pick up on was the one sentence that said he was in accordance with the use of force policy.
Right. That's what the police department wanted to put out.
Essentially, he was. But here's the thing about the use of force policy, use of force continuum, which is the same for every department.
Right.
The word imminent has to be there with that threat. And when you watch that dash cam video, I don't think anybody can argue that there was no imminent threat there against Van Dyke, the other officers, or especially the public if Laquan would have gotten away.
Well,
I don't see that imminent threat.
And if Detective March is the detective and he's his superior and he's getting notes from his superior that he knows are not true because he's seen the video, and if he didn't see and if his superior didn't see the video, he has to show it to him. He knows then, doesn't he, that there was no imminent threat?
Absolutely. And what he should have done, even though that was his supervisor per se, just say, I refuse to put this in my report because it's not true. He couldn't have been suspended or reprimanded for that, because if it's your report, you have to sign your name to that. That's essentially signing your life to this report. So if you sign your name to a report that is not true, that's not on your supervisor, that's on you.
Well, there's other evidence from other issues and manuals and reports and all that another person from the Chicago Police Department spoke about. His name is Mr. Perfetti, and he's going to talk about who was the victim listed in this shooting. Was it Laquan McDonald or was it the 3 officers? Okay, so Laquan McDonald dies. He is shot 16 times. Tell me, Vincent Hale, how is it now, before it was a jury, how is the judge going to believe that these officers were the victims in this matter, which is what you have to fill out on these reports, and they fill themselves out as victims?
They listed themselves as a victim and apparently some other unnamed person as a victim. They said they were assaulted, battered by Laquan McDonald. You heard Van Dyke's testimony that he continued to try to get up off the ground with his left arm. But, of course, the video does not show that. So if that's what they wrote in their reports, then I don't know if I'd go so far as to say cover-up conspiracy, but if that's what they wrote in their report, that's an outright lie.
But they use the problem is they use the same words: battery, lunge appears, and all. How could they all have the same language?
I can understand the same words because police go to the same exact training.
Well, especially if they're considered
at the police academy.
Especially if they're in a conspiracy.
Well, not only that. Again, police use certain language when they're talking about use of force. Like I say the word use of force continuum, or I say escalation or de-escalation. So police use certain words in their vocabulary just as part of their training. So that necessarily
doesn't that mean that it's easy to have a conspiracy because they know how to phrase a cover-up, lunge, battery, etc. So they know if it's a bad shoot.
It doesn't necessarily make it easy to have a conspiracy, but you have to be able to articulate everything you put in that report, and not just verbal or written articulation. When you have video evidence, you have to be able to articulate that video evidence, which is what I think they fell short here on. They cannot articulate the fact that Laquan McDonald was advancing towards anybody in that video, let alone Jason Van Dyke or his partner. You can see he's walking off to the right. He's
walking to the right. He's not an imminent threat.
Actually, you see Van Dyke approaching
him, right? And if Van Dyke is scared of him, he's not going to be approaching him, is he? Is he? He's not going to become. Oh, let me walk closer to you.
He's actually going to take cover. Right. You can still shoot from cover because that's what police are trained to do. But if he thought the threat was there, you likely are not going to approach. I don't want to put my mind in Jason Van Dyke's. I never Monday morning quarterback another officer's decisions. But typically, if I feel there's a threat, I shoot from cover, or I get to cover to get an eye on that target before I approach.
Okay, so here we have to go to another clip of Sergeant Larry Snelling. We talked about the use of force. Let's hear what the Chicago Police Department use of force experts has to say about the use of force. So these use of force continuums, as Vincent Hill points out, are all over the country. We have them in New Jersey. We have them in New York. You can't shoot somebody unless they're an imminent threat. You can't use deadly force, which a gun is, right, Vincent?
That's the key word, imminent threat.
Imminent threat. And imminent means what?
Immediate, like there's no escape from it. That's
right.
Imminent.
And that's what every police officer in the United States is taught, I assume.
That's what they're taught.
And can an imminent threat be something other than a gun?
Yeah, absolutely. Anything can be a deadly weapon, per se, but it still has to be imminent. It has to be in your face. There's no other escape. That's your only option to use deadly force. And so if it's an imminent threat, that's when a police officer can say they were battered or they were assaulted or in some manner they felt threatened, Absolutely,
correct?
Because the act of assault doesn't have to be physical. Just the intent of an assault by most state statute is still an assault. And if you're Detective March from the Chicago Police Department and you're experienced and you know what an imminent threat is, should you be allowing your officers to put on their reports that they were the victims? Absolutely not. Not based on what I saw in that dash cam footage. And if you are Detective March and you have another police officer named Fontaine and she says that, hey, I didn't say he was an imminent threat and he's not an imminent threat, are you supposed to put what she says in your report? Because he didn't. You're supposed to put exactly what she put in that report, because here's the thing. She's trained the exact same way Van Dyke, Marsh, and all the other officers in Chicago are trained according to the use of force continuum. So if she says, hey, I didn't see this threat against Van Dyke from Laquan, then that should be in her report. Is it all or one? Do they ought to be guilty or not guilty?
or can this judge split?
I think the judge can split, especially with the supervisor, because at the end of the day, he was not there on the scene of the shooting. He was not there. He was called in later, the detective. He was called in later.
So, you know, you see that the use of force is very complicated. It's a very complicated case in terms of what the judge is going to find for a conspiracy, for a cover-up. And we're going to be continuing to cover this trial as we have all the trials, as we had Jason Van Dyke. Obviously, stay with us. My name is Kenney Baden. I've been your host today. I'm happy to be your host of this Law and Crime Network, a Dan Abrams production. Please stay tuned to Aaron Keller, the Daily Debrief.